Hello, everybody. Welcome to Grimwit with Dimwits. I'm T.
Hi there, this is Blondie.
I think she forgot she was here with me for a second. We are going to be covering a super interesting episode today. It's a pretty wild case. I guess it's pretty wild because those 70s and 80s were a pretty wild time for serial killers.
Yes, it was. It was very intense.
So we are excited about telling you guys this story, not because there's any excitement in the story, but because there's just so much going on, and we don't know if a lot of people know about this particular serial killer. I think he might have gotten lost in the crowd.
Possibly, because there was a lot going on at that time. Before we get started, how are things going with you, T?
Things are going well. I have no complaints, just, more of the same. Work, home, work, home. How about you?
Work, home. I work from my home, so I guess that's homework.
Dad jokes all day, people. All day.
The only thing that it's actually bizarre going on right now, I think my microwave is possessed.
Oh, did we name it?
The naughty demon. For some reason, it turns itself on in the middle of the night. I honestly believe that there is a ghost in my house that's got a hankering for a Hot Pocket or some popcorn or something in the middle of the night.
I would not want to wake up to burnt popcorn every morning, that's for sure. That is the ugliest smell.
It is invisible, no calories. But yeah, it's freaking me out. Of course, I forget to unplug it before I go to bed, so I got to wake up, go downstairs. It's a deal.
You have to unplug your microwave every single day?
If I use it during the day, I forget to unplug it at night. I lose my brain, apparently. My Hot Pocket just took over my brain and I forgot.
Okay. Your brain's like a ham and cheese, huh?
No, more like a pizza pocket.
A pizza pocket. I don't do Hot Pockets, so I was totally faking that.
Irony of that is, I don't either.
Okay, that's pretty funny.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I think we probably should settle down and tell this very sadistic story.
Wow, that just really, you just changed that tune so fast. It's like, whoa.
I know.
All right.
Kind of went wah-wah.
Oh, bomb, bomb, bomb.
It's sad and trying to be respectful. Not a laughing area.
No, it's not.
Honestly, all these years, we just can't help ourselves, can we?
Well, if you don't laugh, you'll cry.
You could be right on that. So during this episode, we'll be covering Randy Kraft. I'm not sure if a lot of people have heard of him. They may know the name, but not the entire story. He's a sadistic serial killer. It is believed that he drugged, raped, tortured, and killed between 16 and 67 people from 1971 to 1983. Kraft was actually charged with 16 counts of murder, 2 counts of sodomy, and 1 count of emasculation. We will be covering the timeline of the 16 victims he was charged with and the events of Kraft's horrific series of killings. We are letting you know that some of the details are gruesome, just in case you are sensitive to that. He was known as the Southern California Strangler, the Scorecard Killer, and the Freeway Killer. An interesting fact about the Freeway Killer, there were actually 3. Patrick Kearney, William Bonin, and then Randy Kraft, captured in 1983. Kraft got the name the Scorecard Killer from a cryptic list that was located in his trunk during his arrest. The LA Times published an article on October 2nd, 1988, showing the list and how the prosecutors linked the list to the victim. Kraft called the list nothing more than references to his friends and his roommates at the time. On May 14th, 1983, the California Highway Patrol pulled over a car that was driving erratically in Mission Viejo. A man exited the vehicle, poured out his beer he was drinking, and approached the officers with a zipper to his pants down. The officers observed a second man in the passenger seat. He was slouched over with empty beer bottles everywhere and a switchblade knife in plain sight. The officers tried to arouse the passenger to no avail. There were red marks around his neck. He had no shoes, and his pants were unzipped with his genitals out. The driver of the car told the officers he had been drinking, but he was not drunk. A sobriety test was given, and he failed. This man was identified as Randy Kraft. Randy Stephen Kraft was born March 19th, 1945, in Long Beach, California. He was one of 4 children and the only boy. As a child, he was accident-prone and was adored by his mother and sisters. In 1948, his family moved to Midway City in Orange County. Kraft attended Midway City Elementary, where his teachers noted him an intellectual student. When he attended 17th Street Junior High, he took accelerated classes. While attending Westminster High, he obtained A's in his classes and was considered pleasant and occasionally dated girls. However, later some students and teachers had said that they thought he might be homosexual. After high school, where he graduated 10th out of 390 students in June 1963, he went to Claremont Men's College. I did look this up because I was very interested in the men's college portion of it. This college opened in 1946 for men to prepare future leaders of public and private enterprise. It wasn't until 1976 that women were admitted and was still called Claremont Men's College for another 5 years after that.
That's interesting. Why wouldn't they change that if women were admitted?
I'm like, 5 years?
Yeah.
Apparently it was a trial period, maybe? It was a tester?
That's ridiculous. Come on now. Just take out men's. People were so misogynistic.
I agree. I think it might have been just a tradition that they probably didn't want to let go of.
Yeah.
But then after 5 years, it's not strictly men anymore.
Exactly.
In 1964, while still attending Claremont Men's College, Kraft enrolled in ROTC, which stands for Reserved Officers Training Corps. But he also, at this time, began his first known homosexual relationship. He started working as a bartender at a bar in Garden Grove that served mainly gay clientele. In his spare time, Kraft liked to go to Huntington Beach and Laguna Beach to pick up, I have this in quote, hustlers. And in 1966, he was arrested and charged with lewd conduct for propositioning an undercover police officer. No charges were filed since he did not have a previous criminal record. At this time, there was a noticeable change in Kraft. He grew a mustache, his hair long, was known to be into bondage, and would disappear for days on end, and started taking Valium for his migraines and stomach pain. By his senior year at Claremont, his priorities were all-night gambling and poker sessions, along with drinking and drugs. Because of this, his graduation was postponed for 8 months because he was failing. After taking the necessary classes, he graduated in February 1968 with a BA in economics. In June 1968, Kraft joined the U.S. Air Force, and after basic training, he was stationed at Edwards Air Force Base. His position was supervising the painting of test planes. He went up the ranks to Airman First Class and Supervisor Manager. Up until this time, Kraft tried to come out as homosexual to his family by bringing a series of male friends to meet them. His parents and sisters were oblivious. Then in 1969, after becoming an Airman First Class, he came out as homosexual. Apparently, his father flew into a rage, and his mother understood, but was somewhat disapproving. This seems to fit, since while growing up, his mother had time for the children, even though she worked, but his father was never around and not close to the children. Kraft's family did accept his sexuality and remain close, but eventually he distanced himself.
Back then, it really was not as acceptable as it is now. People went through hell trying to come out, and families not understanding, and it was a pretty crazy time for people trying to come out being gay. It wasn't as well accepted, and it was a sad time. Looking back, I knew a lot of men that actually turned out to be gay, and they're wonderful human beings, and it's just sad that people were just so close-minded. If you weren't the norm, so to speak, you just had a very, very hard time.
You did. And some of these people I grew up with turned out to be gay. I love them to death. My friends today.
There's no difference. We're all people. We're all people who love other people, and who we love should have nothing to do with whether we're acceptable in any societal groups or not.
Exactly. Bottom line, we're all human.
Exactly.
We're all the same. Not only was his family stunned once he came out, so was his Air Force supervisors. Kraft received a general discharge, officially listed as medical grounds, on July 26, 1969. I found medical grounds strange.
That was the thing, but you couldn't say it. I don't think they could officially say it and discharge somebody over something like that. We've come a long way, but they sure went through hell back then.
They did. I'm glad we're through it, put it that way.
I know this was probably part of maybe what made him who he is, but it certainly was confusing. And I'm sure this played a key role in him having to do all these things behind the scenes, which gave him the privacy to do more.
Absolutely. After he was discharged, Kraft went back to bartending, started using drugs heavily, drank, but he did actually really dive into the gay lifestyle. Friends would say he would vanish for days, telling them he was going down to the Marine base to look for Marines. It was also noted at this time that his friends said he had a very eruptive temper and would lose it every once in a while. And like we were just talking, you can see how it tumbled once he got discharged, how things just started the slow roll. I don't want to say downhill, but drinking and drugs to maybe ease his pain.
Right. He was already, besides being crazy in the long run, he was already an outcast from society.
He was. But the irony of all of this is he's a very intelligent man. From the get-go, he was very intelligent.
It sounds like he is. And had he just not went the way of the dark route, he could have been something.
He could have. His first known victim. Kraft met Joseph Fancher, 13 years old, from Westminster in March 1970 on the Huntington Beach boardwalk. Fancher told Kraft that he had run away from home. Kraft took him back to his Belmont Shore apartment, saying he could stay with him, promising Fancher sex with a woman that he knew. Kraft plied him with drugs, alcohol, and marijuana, showing him pictures of men having sex. Kraft had beaten him, removed his clothes, and repeatedly sexually assaulted him. During Kraft's attack, Fancher was semi-conscious and resisting. Kraft had threatened to kill him. Hours later, Kraft left for work, leaving Fancher drugged and battered. He escaped the apartment barefoot and ran to a local business. An ambulance was called, and Fancher's stomach had to be pumped. While in the hospital, he told police he had taken the drugs Kraft had given him, but then beat him. It was said that Fancher did not tell anyone he was sexually assaulted because he thought no one would believe him and he was embarrassed. He took police to Kraft's apartment. His roommate cooperated with the search, where they found the boy's shoes, illegal drugs, and 76 photos of Kraft having sex with men. Ultimately, because Fancher said he took the drugs voluntarily and the search was done without a warrant, no charges were filed.
That's so frustrating when little things just contribute to people not being able to be arrested. Little mistakes.
And this is why laws change over time, so they can't be thrown out.
Right.
Fancher suffered over the years from fear to explosive violence. He was sent to juvenile hall, then later in and out of prison on charges from drugs, burglary, and theft. It took him 20 years to tell his family what actually happened to him that day. He turned into a big, unhappy biker type. It is unclear where he is today. That just makes me sad.
It sounds like he's definitely in a more aggressive role as an adult. So hopefully he's not continuing with any type of a vicious cycle and he's not out there doing the same. I hope and pray he's not. I'm not saying he is. I just hope and pray he's not.
You would hope after he knew what it felt like to go through that, he wouldn't do that to someone else.
But that's the part that never makes sense to me in the whole vicious cycle. It's like people understand they've been on the other side and yet they go full circle and they become the aggressor in the situation. I'll never understand that.
It is very true. In 1971, Kraft found a new job at a Huntington Beach bottled water plant as a forklift driver. At this same time, he enrolled in LBSU, Long Beach State University, and briefly took classes in education. However, his desire to party and be a part of the gay scene outweighed his education. Kraft met Jeff Graves, also a student at LBSU. They started a relationship and moved in together. Kraft still felt the need to cruise gay bars for hookups. 15 months had passed, and on December 26, 1972, the body of Edward Daniel Moore, a 20-year-old Marine was found at the San Gabriel and San Diego Freeway interchange in Seal Beach. It appeared as though he had been pushed from a moving car based on the abrasions on his body. He was last seen leaving his barracks at Camp Pendleton on December 24th. The autopsy showed that he had been bound by his wrists and ankles, bite marks on his genitals, his face was beaten with a blunt object, and one of his socks was shoved into his rectum, and he was strangled. According to Kraft's scorecard, he was referred to as EDM.
Oh, so he starts off with EDM, which are the guy's initials, right?
Right. This is the scorecard that they found in his trunk.
That I'm assuming he kept to go back and maybe keep everything clear in his head. And I don't know. Who knows? This is crazy.
We will never know what his motivation for the scorecard was. 2 months later, in April 1973, the body of Kevin Clark Bailey, 17 years old, was found on Ellis Street in Huntington Beach. He was completely dressed, with the exception of his shoes and socks. Kevin had marks indenting his wrists, and under his bloody pants, they found that he had been sodomized and his genitals were removed. They were unsure of his cause of death. It was either asphyxiation or he bled to death.
Wow.
Ronnie Jean Weeb, 20 years old, was last seen on July 28, 1973, while bar hopping. He was discovered 2 days later, discarded beside the 405 freeway and the 7th Street on-ramp in Seal Beach. Ronnie was fully dressed, minus his shoes. There were welt marks on his ankles and wrists, and he was strangled. Before he died, he was suspended upside down, tortured, and beaten with bite marks on his body and genitals. They found his own sock in his anus. His scorecard, 7th Street.
I just have so many thoughts in my head right now, but I don't want to interrupt you. Keep going.
Hitchhiking in their hometown of Long Beach on March 29, 1975, Keith Davin Crotwell, 19, and Kent May were spotted by friends in a black and white Mustang, but it simply vanished. 4 months later, boys playing by the Long Beach Marina spotted a severed skull on a jetty. It was Keith Crotwell. His friends searched the neighborhood for the black and white Mustang, found it, and notified police. The vehicle was registered to Randy Kraft. They questioned Kraft on May 19, 1975. He initially said he didn't know anything about them, but later said that he had picked Crotwell and May up on March 29th, offered them alcohol and Valium. He then dropped off May in the same parking lot that he picked them up. Crotwell was drunk, so they cruised around and they went down a side road near the El Toro off-ramp where the Mustang ended up on an embankment. Kraft left Crotwell in the car to go call for help. When he returned, Crotwell was gone. Homicide detectives attempted to file homicide charges a few weeks later. However, the LA District Attorney's Office declined, stating that the coroner's conclusion, based on only the skull, found that Crotwell died of an accidental drowning. His scorecard, parking lot.
I am so curious to know how the coroner can conclude that he died of drowning when he only has the skull.
I wondered that myself. This particular one, there were a lot of questions, but from the information that I got, that is what they came up with. I did find it interesting.
I wish I knew any type of science about that, because just hearing you say that, and it's like, that makes no sense. Maybe it does on the other side of this, people who are coroners, but it makes no sense. And it's really sad in this particular one because the friends actually went looking, found Randy Kraft, and still nothing happened to him.
Right.
It's wow.
If you look at his record, he does have a few things going on, but I guess nothing concrete enough to say, yeah, he did this.
It's all the science, and he just seems to keep getting lucky over and over and over again.
He does. There was a long hiatus speculating that the close call rattled Kraft. He still suffered from migraines and stomach issues at this point, but in June 1975, Kraft was arrested for lewd conduct, a misdemeanor in Cherry Park. A short time later, his employer downsized and let Kraft go. He worked part-time as a computer operator. At a party in San Juan Capistrano celebrating the new year, December 31st, 1975, 22-year-old Mark Hall disappeared. On January 3rd, 1976, a police officer found Hall in a remote canyon tied to a tree and tortured. His chest, nose, cheeks, eyes, and scrotum were burned with a cigarette lighter. His legs were slashed with a sharp object. He had been sodomized, emasculated, and his severed genitals had been pushed into his rectum. The cause of death was asphyxiation from leaves and mud found lodged in his throat, according to the autopsy. It was later said that this was the worst of all of Kraft's known murders. His scorecard, New Year's Eve.
How? I mean, there were so many things done to this poor guy. Why so many things? I'll never understand this. This is insane.
Well, part of the theory, too, is that it's more than one person. So that could be the volume of things. It wasn't just one person doing it.
It just seems so hateful. And how can you hate somebody you literally just met that night? How can you hate anybody this much?
What's going on in someone's brain to be able to cause that much pain?
Exactly. And again, we'll never understand this level of craziness, but it's just unbelievable.
By the end of the year, Kraft and Jeff Graves' relationship began to crumble due to all the troubles with the police. Shortly after, Kraft began a relationship with Jeff Seelig, 19 years old, who was an apprentice baker. They moved to Laguna Hills and enjoyed picking up hitchhikers with the hopes they would go home with them for threesomes. Seelig was very adamant that Kraft was not violent. It was presumed that their relationship was the reason there was a lull in the killings. During 1976 and 1977, there were multiple bodies that were dumped along the freeway, placed in trash bags, or dumped along the Mexican border. There were 9 confirmed slayings in 1976 that are now younger in age, 13 to 19, than the prior victims. So like I was saying before, the police were at this point actually suspecting 2 killers because so many of the victims had been thrown out of the car.
Yeah, that would be hard for one guy to do. So that's reasonable that they would think there was 2.
True. Even though they're not resisting because they're obviously dead, they're still heavy. You still have to have force, being on the freeway especially.
Right. I mean, you got to be able to drive and push a full dead weight body out at the same time. That's
tough. That's tough.
I get where they're coming from with thinking there was 2 killers, and plus all the torture. Who would think that one guy could do all that?
It's hard to even fathom in my brain.
It really is.
By July 1977, Patrick Kearney was arrested and confessed to the murder of 28 boys that he had shot, dissected, and discarded in trash bags along the Southern California freeways. Kearney was sent to San Quentin Prison in early 1978. There were hopes the killings would now stop because Kearney was put away, but on April 16, 1978, Scott Hughes, an 18-year-old Marine, was found on the shoulder of the Riverside 91 freeway at the Euclid Street on-ramp in Anaheim. When they found him, he was fully dressed with the exception of his shoelaces. There was Valium in his blood. He was strangled with a ligature. His genitals were mutilated, and one of his testicles was removed. Scorecard, Euclid. Roland Young had just been released from the Orange County Jail after a public intoxication arrest. He disappeared after his release, but when found on June 11, 1978, he had alcohol and Valium in his system. His body was in a gutter and full of abrasions that investigators figured were from being thrown from a moving car. He was redressed, but his genitals were removed. He had been stabbed multiple times, with the cause of death a stab wound through his heart. Scorecard, jail out.
Is it just me, or are these little names that he's putting on these scorecards just saying so much about him and what stuck out to him? It's really so disturbing.
I think that it is something so he could, like you said earlier, he could look back on, I don't want to say with fond memories, but it would help him remember what happened.
Yeah, but I'm saying like what he names them is just so, what's the word? It's just
disturbing?
It's almost like it's almost like he's just minimizing them by these words. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's just little quips instead of what he
Yeah,
actually
little
did.
quips instead of right. It's just like, here's the memory. Here's how I'm going to remember this one: jail, and then out of the car. I'm assuming. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's disgusting.
Very. Richard Keith, a 20-year-old Marine, went to go see his girlfriend. He hitchhiked from Camp Pendleton to Carson on June 19, 1978. He left his girlfriend's house to hitchhike back to the base. That was the last time he was seen alive. The next morning, an off-duty fireman found his body along Moulton Parkway in Orange County. His cause of death was strangulation. Scorecard, Marine Carson.
See how he just minimizes it down to 2 words?
Yep.
Gosh, it's like he has no heart, none whatsoever.
3 weeks later, on July 6, 1978, a hitchhiker was found in a traffic lane on the I-5 in Mission Viejo by a motorist. Keith Klingbeil, 23 years old, was still alive when he was found, but died later at the hospital. He had massive amounts of Tylenol and alcohol in his system, with ligature marks on his ankles, and his nipple was burned with a cigarette lighter. Before he was tossed onto the freeway, he was strangled with a shoelace. Scorecard, hike out LB boots.
Wow.
A Long Beach truck driver, Michael Joseph Inderbeiden, 21, was found along the 605 on-ramp on November 18, 1978. His body suffered cigarette burns similar to Mark Hall. He was castrated, and a foreign object was forced into his body cavity. He had been strangled. Scorecard, DART 405. Now imagine getting onto the 405 freeway and witnessing a man being thrown from a moving vehicle. The man being discarded was another Marine, 20-year-old Donald Crissell, on June 16, 1979. He was only in shorts, and like Keith Klingbeil, his nipple was burned with a cigarette lighter. He had been bound and tortured with a rope. Although after all of this, that's not what he died of. He had an overdose of drugs and acute alcohol poisoning. Scorecard, Marine drunk, overnight shorts. In 1979, more than a dozen bodies were found along the Southern California freeway, ages ranging from 13 to 24. In an effort to help potential victims, gay bars started posting warnings and asking for any information as to who the killer or killers might be. Now, I can only imagine what a terrifying time that was.
It really was a terrifying time. And I don't know much about Randy Kraft, so I'm hearing a lot of this stuff for the first time. But wow, it's shocking. And just looking back, during the 70s and 80s was a crazy time for prolific serial killers. I'm guessing it's because people were more trusting back then. It was following the era of like hippies and hitchhiking and people leaving their doors unlocked. And these serial killers came in and just pretty much taught America that those types of people are soon to be victims. Yep. And people had to change their ways.
It really was a perfect time for serial killers because of the hitchhiking and the trust. And like you said, people leaving their windows open. It made people vulnerable.
It made people vulnerable. And it's sad because it really took away a time in America, probably the last time in America, people were able to feel safe in their homes, keeping their doors unlocked, not worrying about people coming in when doing anything they shouldn't be. It was like the last innocent, all-American time period. And that was all taken away by this crazy amount of serial killers that just decided to act on their desires and wanting to kill. It changed everything. It really changed everything in America.
It really did. I do remember the time of just be home before the streetlights come on.
Right? You could be out. You could be a little kid. You could be a preteen. You could be all hanging out together and you're out and nobody knew where you were until the lights came on. And then people maybe started to worry.
Right.
But it was such an innocent time back then. I remember some of my friends saying, I'm not even allowed to go home till the lights come on because Mom didn't want to deal with them and have them messing up the house.
They're trying, Mom's trying to make dinner. We don't want to have you go, I'm hungry.
Right. Remember that? It was so innocent. And people be like, well, I can't go home yet because the lights aren't on.
You're absolutely right.
It was a wonderful time. And it's so sad that people coming in and seeing an opportunity to take advantage, to act on their desires and insanity, it just changed everything. And now it's unheard of. Nobody's going to let their kids ride out on the street in a city on a bike, go wherever they want and stay out till dark.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty much unheard of. All that has been taken away.
It has been taken away.
When you see anything about the all-American lifestyle, that was always part of it. The families in the park, the kids riding bikes and playing outside, people just out and about doing things, neighbors helping neighbors. It was a different time. And it is just a shame that even though we're presenting these cases and that it has affected all these victims that were taken, unfortunately, it literally affected the entire history of how we live. We've had to change it all due to this. Mm-hmm. So these stories are very important. It's not just the victims in these stories. They paid the ultimate price.
They did.
But truly, all of America was affected by this.
You're right. They did pay the ultimate price.
They did.
You would always hope that would never happen. But unfortunately, there are people out there that are just sick, and this is what happens.
Sick and twisted individuals. And it just makes me sad because I feel like I was there for a little part of the good times, and then quickly things just went sour really
They were
fast.
gone. Right.
Mm-hmm, they were gone. But our children, grandchildren will never know what it was like back then. And that's really sad. It's truly tragic.
It is sad. Well, this is the end of the first half of Randy Kraft. So next week, we will share all the details of what happened with the scorecard killer.
There's still quite a few more victims to talk about, right?
Yes, there are some victims left to talk about, along with what happened to Randy Kraft.
Yes, we definitely want to know. So I'm sure anybody that started this story will be right here next week to hear the end of it. I want to hear the end of it too.
Well, thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you all for listening. Have fun, take care, and just let your imaginations run wild.
Bye.
Bye-bye. We just want to thank you all for sharing your time with us. And if you'd like to send in your creepy little grim bits, we would love to hear your personal stories, interests, and suggestions. Please email them to grimwitwithdimwits@gmail.com. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at grimwitwithdimwits and Facebook Grimwit with Dimwits to listen for our new episodes, and feel free to share with your grim-loving friends. We would really appreciate if you would take a minute to rate and review. 5-star ratings go a long way and would really help us out. Until then, we would love it if you'd come back next week to delve with us into the strange and unusual things we just can't wrap our skulls around.